Welcome to Drone Safety Academy. We're going to cover over 100 newbie fails, experienced pilot fails, and tips and tricks. If you know someone who's a brand new drone pilot or about to receive a drone or unmanned aircraft as a gift, this is the video you need to share. Drone Safety Academy believes in setting people up for success, everyone to the extent possible. That's why we have created an Indiegogo campaign to have all our 82 videos that are available on YouTube and Facebook to have each and every one of those included with American Sign Language. A quick note about Drone Safety Academy. We provide free training for anyone who wants to succeed at the FAA Remote Pilot Exam and Certification. That's right, 82 videos freely available on YouTube and Facebook. We also have what we believe to be the best study guide on the market, 174 pages, professional grade. All right, this video is broken down into 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about the top 10 categories that newbies fail at. And then we're going to do a deep dive into each one of those categories, so there's lots to learn here. Then we'll talk about where experienced pilots fail, and then tips and tricks. The number one category of newbie fails is not completely understanding your drone, not reading the manual, not watching the instructional videos, or practicing on a simulator that might come with your new drone. The second category of newbie mistakes includes flying the drone or unmanned aircraft beyond its technical capabilities, too high or too far. You might not get it back. The third category of newbie mistakes includes flying beyond their skill level. Take it easy. The good news is many of the more premium drone manufacturers provide beginner mode to get you started, but sometimes people get in trouble. The fourth category of newbie mistakes or fails is not understanding your environment, not looking around for obstacles, not understanding the wind, people that are around you, or any of the property or houses or buildings. The fifth category of newbie fails includes the orientation of the aircraft, failing to understand which direction it's pointing or even where it's at. The sixth category of newbie mistakes is probably, technically speaking, the most important, and that is failing to understand the batteries of the drone, the batteries of the console, and also, if applicable, the batteries of the tablet or phone. The seventh category of newbie fails is failing to maintain visual line of sight. Yeah, losing sight of your drone is a big deal. The eighth category of newbie fails includes failing to understand the complexities of the return to home feature or failsafe feature. The ninth category of newbie fails is flying indoors for the first time. Hey, here's a tip for the parents. Take the propellers away until they fully understand the drone, the manual, and watch the instructional videos. And, if available, practiced with a simulator. The 10th category of newbie fails includes failing to understand the features of GPS lock, calibration, and radio frequency interferences. One of the biggest mistakes that you can make as a drone or unmanned aircraft pilot is flying while intoxicated. Do not take drugs. Do not drink alcohol, even if you're at a party with all your best friends and you want to show off your drone. Don't do it. A serious fail or mistake that new pilots will make is piloting an unmanned aircraft or a drone when they are physically or mentally unsafe for the operation. That may be an illness or an injury or something that's going to interfere with safe operations. Understand your medical conditions and how that may impact safe operations. Definitely one of the most common newbie mistakes or fails is not registering your drone with the FAA. you can register as a recreational user or a commercial user as long as the drone or unmanned aircraft weighs 0.55 pounds or more. You need to register your drone. If it weighs less than that, hey, you're okay. Another serious fail with respect to registration of your unmanned aircraft or drone is failing to update the information regarding your drone or unmanned aircraft with the FAA drone database. If there are any changes with respect to your name, address, the status of the drone, has it been destroyed, has it changed hands, have you bought a new drone or unmanned aircraft, have you sold one? If there are any changes, you have 14 days to make that change in the FAA drone database. Alright, one more newbie fail with regards to registration, and this one's very important because if you get caught, you can incur penalties or fines. It's very important that once you register your drone with the FAA database, they give you a number to attach to the outside of your drone or unmanned aircraft. It needs to be on your aircraft during the flight at all times, and it must be legible and visible. It cannot be on the inside, it must be on the exterior. A very common fail that most drone pilots make, and this goes for newbies and experienced pilots, not checking with the local or state laws regarding unmanned aircraft. This is so important because this is the gotcha. Everyone seems to know the federal level ones, Part 107, those are pretty easy. But what about the ones with the state and local laws? Or the national parks, the state parks, conservation areas? Do your research. Another common newbie and experienced pilot mistake is when you buy a new drone, you fail to read the entire manual. I'm just kidding. This is not a drone manual. They're not that big. They're pretty easy. And a lot of times, after you read that, you can watch some instructional videos. And they have a simulator. Slam dunk. Make sure you read up. A really huge newbie mistake is not truly understanding your lithium or LiPo batteries for your unmanned aircraft. This is a big deal. Read the manual. Watch the instructional videos. These LiPo batteries have a problem with thermal runaway. If there are bulges, if there's damages, understand the operating limitations. For example, this DJI intelligent battery has an operating range of 14 degrees to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside of those ranges, it could have problems, even catch fire or explode. Alright, this one's not necessarily about a fail or a mistake, but it is something worth considering. Understand that when you're on YouTube, you're going to come across so many unmanned aircraft or drone crash videos, or a list of the top 10, top 20 fails or mistakes. Every one of them says, hey, I've seen these fails. So you would think that these accidents happen all the time. So consider getting some insurance to protect you, your property, or if your drone accidentally hits someone and they sue you. Make sure that you document everything. One of the biggest mistakes a new or experienced drone or unmanned aircraft pilot will make is not downloading and installing the Before You Fly app from the FAA. So important. This will tell you where you can fly. Are there any temporary flight restrictions? Things like that. So important. This just might save your butt. Truly, one of the biggest fails a newbie or experienced pilot can make is not understanding that the FAA and authorities can step in at any time if you have reckless or dangerous types of behavior with your unmanned aircraft or drone. Let me read this because this is really important. This is for recreational pilots, and the language is similar for commercial pilots as well. Nothing in this section shall be construed to limit the authority of the administrator to pursue an enforcement action against a person operating any unmanned aircraft who endangers the safety of the national airspace system. That's right. Reckless and dangerous behavior, they can step in and take action. A huge newbie fail is flying in restricted areas. Be sure to download the Before You Fly app and utilize that. That'll let you know. Also, don't fly around any fire lookout stations. Those people are up there to look out for smoke, and if they're distracted by a drone, you're interfering with their fire prevention efforts. Another common newbie mistake is flying too high, above the limit. The limit is 400 feet above ground level. If you go higher than that, you are breaking the rules. It's a law for recreational and commercial drone and unmanned aircraft pilots. Don't do it. The maximum ground speed for a commercial unmanned aircraft pilot is 87 knots or 100 miles per hour. This is really important for commercial pilots, but it is something that you need to pay attention to as a recreational pilot as well. A huge newbie fail is not paying attention to the minimum flight visibility for flight operations. This is really important. On a clear day, you should be able to see no less than 3 statute miles. That doesn't mean that you can go fly 3 miles away. It means that the clarity of the environment and what you see around you should be up to 3 statute miles. Make sense? Piloting your unmanned aircraft or drone through a cloud seems like a really awesome thing to do, but it's a huge fail. Don't do it. There are cloud restrictions, 2,000 feet horizontally and 500 feet below. Do not fly above it. These restrictions are there for a reason. So let's take, for example, a single engine airplane going at 125 miles per hour. If that plane goes through the cloud, and as soon as you see it exit that cloud, you have roughly 7 seconds, 7 to 10 seconds to yield right of way. So keep a sharp eye out and stay away from those clouds. Another huge fail is choosing areas that might interfere with your GPS or command and control frequencies. And what I mean by command and control, the Wi-Fi, the video feed, the command sticks that communicate between your control station and the drone. So important that you choose the right area for a successful flight. If you fly around radio stations or anything that has intense Wi-Fi or other frequencies or radio channels, expect problems. Flying near metal or taking off from a metal surface is a huge newbie mistake. Don't do it. The metal will interfere with your GPS and your Wi-Fi command and control connections between your control station and your drone or unmanned aircraft. So if this happens, your drone may go into ATTI mode. And ATTI mode means that the altitude will remain, it won't go up or down, but the lock in terms of staying in one place is gone. That means that the drone or unmanned aircraft will drift. The wind will push it. You must control its position. Expecting GPS lock to always be there for you is a huge newbie mistake. Every experienced drone or unmanned aircraft pilot knows that at some point you're going to lose GPS and your drone's going to go into ATTI mode. So, force your drone into ATTI mode in an area that's safe to practice and get used to it. It's really important, particularly on windy days. New pilots of unmanned aircraft and drones typically don't quite get the density impact of concrete, metal bridges, tunnels, things like that. Anything with a lot of density or anything like metal that's going to interfere with radio frequency and GPS, these things happen. Avoid those as a beginner. A common newbie mistake is not quite understanding what geofencing is with regards to their drone or unmanned aircraft. This is a feature for more premium types of drones that restricts a drone from flying into or starting or launching in restricted airspaces. Flying indoors as a newbie for the first time is a huge fail. You will crash into something, particularly if your drone does not have any sensors that understand the environment around it. to protect itself from bumping into walls. So be sure to practice outside and understand the capabilities of your sensors. For example, these sensors here are premium. They're going to do really well in helping me fly indoors. But the problem is it doesn't really work very well between shiny linoleum and then transitioning to carpet. So understand these limitations. Relying on the object avoidance sensors on your drone creates a false sense of security, and this is a noob fail. Don't do it. Learn and understand the capacity and limitations of your sensors. They don't do too well with tree branches or wires, and they tend to not do so well in low light situations as well, but that depends on the model. Not understanding how cold weather impacts lithium batteries or LiPo batteries is a fail. You need to understand how cold weather impacts these batteries. In cold weather, these guys will discharge faster. So if you're expecting this to behave as it does in warmer weather, you have failed. The next really big noob fail is the combination stick command and using it inappropriately or using it when you panic. Don't panic. The combination stick command stops the motors, and the drone or unmanned aircraft will simply drop out of the sky, and it could hit someone. So be very careful. It stops the motors. So the combination stick command is when you push the sticks down and into the center, or on other models down and out. Don't do it unless you need it. A common newbie fail is not watching the manufacturer's "what should I do in case of" videos. Those are really important. They provide those because they know that some things are going to fail or be misconfigured, or something's going to happen like a GPS interference, whatever it happens to be. They've created videos, at least most of them have. So be sure to take the time out to watch these and get to understand and know your drone or unmanned aircraft. It's important for safety reasons. Probably one of the greatest fails a newbie can make is failing to plan for your flight. Plan it all out. Get all the details. What is it you want to achieve? Do a flight plan. Do step-throughs, particularly if you're doing some type of photography or videography. Okay? So figure all the steps out. Figure out all the precautions. All the people that you need to communicate with. Check your before you fly app. Everything. Plan your flight. Alright, you're planning your flight, and that's good, but it would be a huge fail if you didn't visit the location prior to the flight. This is so important to get familiar with the environment, the people, the property that's around there, and the risks that may impact the people and the property. What happens if your drone or unmanned aircraft goes rogue? Plan for it. Understand the weather for that area. Flying your drone or unmanned aircraft around a major sporting event or around an event at a stadium is a huge fail, and you may get in trouble with the law, so don't do it. Download the Before You Fly app and check for any temporary flight restrictions around stadiums. Alright, you're doing a lot of planning, and that's good, but don't fail at looking for wires or power lines, things like that. They're almost invisible during twilight times, and that's important to keep in mind. Also, flocks of birds. Is the area prone to having flocks of birds? Pay attention to these things. Not doing so is a huge fail. Not checking the weather is a huge fail. Make sure that you check the weather forecast and understand what's going to happen during your planned flight. This is a big deal because the weather can change on a dime, and forecasts help. So if you can't get access to a weather forecast, don't fly. Failing to plan for radio interference of your command and control links would be a huge fail. So make sure that if you're flying next to commercial buildings or apartment buildings where radio interference is likely to happen, then you need to prepare for the worst. Here's a pro tip for you. Avoid flying around any marinas or any large yachts. The larger the boat, the greater the likelihood that there's going to be radio interference. If you plan on flying in cold weather, expect that your phone or tablet will perform poorly. It's a good idea to fly with a spotter or visual observer. They help you see and avoid. They're the ones that are going to directly communicate to you if there are any hazards. Flying first-person view without a spotter is a complete failure. You have limited situational awareness when you're doing first-person view without a spotter. It's risky. Don't do it. Plan your launch spot carefully, particularly with return to home sequence. This is important because sometimes with some drones, the return to home sequence means that the drone may land within 50 feet of the launch spot. Premium drones have intelligent battery alerts and sensors and let you know when to return home when the battery's low or reaches a critical level. This is important. However, some manufacturers of drones and drone models don't have all these battery intelligent functions. So bring a timer with you. Set it for 5 minutes. That's when you bring the drone home, or whatever the time is for that particular drone. But it is helpful. The biggest fail a newbie can make with regards to settings is not paying attention to the settings that you have for one location and you move off to another location. Those old location settings may become a flight hazard for the new location. This is serious. Also, if you buy an old used drone from somebody else and they have pre-programmed settings, those might be a flight hazard for your current location. Pay attention. A common newbie fail is failing to put all your gadgetry into airplane mode. Your Fitbit, your smartwatch, your personal phone, all that. As a new drone or unmanned aircraft pilot, it is a good idea to adjust the battery alert to 30% or higher so that when the battery reaches that level, you'll get a little notification that says, hey, bring that guy back home. Here's the best pro tip I can give parents and newbies to new drones and unmanned aircraft. Make sure that you force the altitude restriction in distance so that the drone doesn't go too high or too far until you're totally comfortable. One of the other best pro tips I can give parents is take the propellers away until your daughter or your son has fully understood the manual, the training videos, the simulator. Make sure that they can't fly that drone or unmanned aircraft until they totally understand what they're getting into. A common newbie fail is forgetting to adjust the return to home altitude. Return to home may be initiated manually or automatically due to critical battery levels. The drone will rise vertically to a set altitude, move horizontally till it gets to the home destination, and then descends. So on a previous flight, you may have set it for 50 feet. Then at the new site, there may be a requirement to set it to 150. So at the new site, if you issue return to home sequence and it only goes up to 50, there may be a problem. It might become a safety hazard. Premium drones have automatic return to home location settings. In other words, once you fire this guy up, it's automatically going to find and establish the return to home location. On some drones, however, you have to manually set that. And that's important to know because if on one location you set a return to home and then you forget at a new location and you hit return to home sequence, goodbye drone! One of the cool features of mini drones is setting up waypoints or a route for the drone to follow. And simply the pilot taps on the screen the locations of where the drone needs to go. Okay, so this is where the fail begins, not understanding the settings with regards to the waypoints that you set on the map. You need to make sure that the drone flies up vertically at start and then follows the path or goes to the waypoints. This is so important because if it starts at ground zero going to the first waypoint, it will gradually gain altitude to get to that particular waypoint. At which point, who knows, there might be a building or people or some type of object in the way. That spells trouble. One of the issues that are faced for drone pilots or unmanned aircraft pilots is updating the firmware of the drones and the controller. This is really important because there may be bugs in the firmware that need to be fixed. Sometimes when you update the firmware, you're introducing firmware that hasn't been fully tested appropriately and you've introduced a bug. So it's a give or take. Many professionals, what they do is they hold off on the latest update and they keep a pulse on a user group to see how the new update, the new firmware or software is behaving before they upgrade or update to that new firmware. Keep an eye on that. Also, it's important to note that if you don't update your firmware and you do get into an accident and someone hires a lawyer to start gathering information, one of the questions that the lawyer is going to try and research and gain access to is, hey, have you kept your software and firmware up to date? A common newbie fail is forgetting to remove the protective gear and protective stickers on sensors, the gimbal, the clamps, the whole bit. This guy, people forget all the time. Probably the most important drone fail of this section is topping off your batteries. Make sure that you top off your batteries for your drone, your controller, and also your tablet. Get it at 100% and you're that much safer. Some people let their drone batteries sit for a little bit and they don't charge them, then suddenly they want to go out flying. They check the level and it says 78. They get out there in the field, they start flying for a minute and suddenly it drops down to 50. Hey, that's normal battery behavior. So always top off your battery and then you'll be that much safer. A common newbie fail is not having a dedicated tablet for your controller. It is very important not to have a tablet that's being shared across your family and friends, and who knows if it gets a virus on it. It then becomes a safety concern. Also, the size of the tablet is very important. If you choose something like this, a phone, it will work, but you're having to focus a little bit harder on the details. If you go too large, like in this case, then the weight of the tablet can make it difficult for it to hold. Okay, so I typically prefer something that is more like this, an 8-inch, 7-inch tablet. Another really important newbie fail to pay attention to is calibrating your IMU and gyro. I do this every time before I fly. This is so important, especially if you move from one location to another location. This helps with return to home sequence, landing gear, high precision satellite connections. This is super important. And when you do it, you need to make sure that you do it on a flat, level surface. The more premium drones will let you know whether or not you're on a flat, level surface. The lesser, the more economical drones, let's call it that, they don't have that feature. So you need to calibrate that on a flat, level surface for those more economical drones and do it, make it a practice of doing it every time. It's not uncommon for first-time pilots and new drone owners to do everything inside. They unwrap the box, they start following the directions, and they start to calibrate the IMU or the gyro, and they're doing this inside. Don't do it inside. Make sure that when you calibrate, it's always outside. This next fail you can't mess up. Let's say your drone or unmanned aircraft is really far away and you're relying on your display, your tablet. Okay, so suddenly you can't see it due to the sun and you forgot your screen. This helps with the sun. Okay, the other option, of course, is to stand in the shadow. Pretty basic. For this next fail, I think we're all guilty of this. Always make sure that you turn on your controllers first, then your drone. Do the opposite when you're ready to shut things down. Turn off your drone, then turn off your controller. New drone or unmanned aircraft pilots are really excited. They want to get out and start playing around, having a good time. And one of the biggest fails that they can commit is not doing a pre-flight inspection, checking the propellers, the battery levels. Hey, if there's an accident and the victim, whether it's a person or the owner of the property, hires a lawyer, what are they going to do? They're going to start asking whether or not you did a pre-flight inspection. All right, you've started your pre-flight inspection. You're really excited. You've checked the battery levels. They're at 100%. You fired up and you launch. Okay, heads up. And next thing you notice, the drone is waving back and forth and drifting with the wind. Well, I'll tell you what just happened. You didn't let it sit and get enough of the GPS satellites, at which point it goes into ADI mode. Make sure that you let it sit for at least a minute to get enough of the satellite link connections. For commercial pilots, this means 4 or more satellite connections. All right, don't be that person who fails to properly inspect their props, okay? So, let's take a look. Put this guy on. All right, not too tight, not too loose. Pull up and down. Did you hear that click? That's what I like about this model, is that you can actually hear the click. You know it's in place. But I still pull up and down. Once you've inspected these, you want to start them and check for any irregular movement or imbalances of the propeller before you actually take off. A newbie fail during the pre-flight inspection is not checking the attached objects, making sure that they're firmly and securely in place. Also making sure that whatever is attached to the drone does not adversely affect the flight performance of the drone. Very important. So for example, a common one is the battery. And again, we're talking about many different types of drones. These types of drones are really nice so that when you put in the battery, you actually hear the click. Very nice. Okay. You can also buy drone accessories, ones that attach to the drone, such as remotely dropping an object. So this is an accessory that you can attach to your drone that will allow you to remotely drop an object. You need to make sure that both of those items, whatever's attached to the accessory and the accessory attached to the drone, are securely in place. Alright, you're doing your pre-flight inspection, and one of the things that you want to check, and this is pretty rare, is your prop guards. Okay, if you've taken them off and they used screws, then you want to make sure that you didn't put the screws back into the holes to make sure that you don't lose them. In which case, if you have and you've screwed it a little bit too far, it may go into the servo motor. Okay, so check to make sure that it's not interfering with the servo motor function. I prefer prop guards that snap together. These prop guards, the only drawback with these guys is that in this case, these lights right here are actually covered. So what I plan on doing is actually cut the little area out here, and I think I'll be in a good spot. But I really haven't had a need for these too much. Make it a common practice for yourself to remove the props before you go inside, particularly if you're going to do any type of maintenance or preventative maintenance. If your drone accidentally comes to life while you're working on it and the props are on there, it's going to be a bad day. I've seen pictures where this has happened and it didn't look pretty. Not taking good care of your drone or unmanned aircraft is a definite fail. Make sure that you establish a maintenance schedule, time and service for all the parts, particularly the battery. Hey, take good care of it. Extend the life of your fun. Taking care of your LiPo or lithium batteries is not just a good idea, it's a safety precaution. You need to make sure that you read the user manual and understand what the manufacturer states about that product. It is so important that if you're going to store these, that you store them in a fireproof bag. Also, if you store them for more than 3 months, you need to charge them and discharge them roughly down to 40 to 60%. Do this every 3 months. Also, make sure that you do not store them in any area in which the temperature reaches 158 degrees or more Fahrenheit. Otherwise, it may catch fire, do thermal runaway, and according to DJI, might even explode. Next up are a few pro tips. Make sure that when you go out that you bring all your registration documentation for your drone or unmanned aircraft. It's just a good idea. Also, now that you've registered your drone or unmanned aircraft, make sure that you've properly marked it on the exterior of the drone or unmanned aircraft. Very important, it cannot be on the inside. It needs to be legible and visible and readily accessible, but just not on the inside. This next pro tip is all about avoiding people and crowds. Some people have a bad opinion about drones or unmanned aircraft, and they want to let you know. This will be a drone confrontation. If this happens to you, just act calmly. Put the drone into hover mode, and maybe you can defuse the situation. The last thing you want to do is take your mind off what the drone is doing or what's happening to the drone. Maybe land it safely, but in any case, act calmly and try to land it. This next pro tip is all about the planning process, and if you can, avoid situations where you have to act or react under pressure. If you can plan these out and avoid this, you're in a good spot. You're a safer pilot. Alright, the last pro tip. Make sure that if you see somebody else's drone, you don't pick it up. Okay, leave it where it's at, because if you pick it up and it suddenly comes to life, it's going to be a bad day. This section is all about general good ideas and keeping things in mind about your drone or unmanned aircraft. These are not toys, and if you treat these like toys, somebody's going to get hurt, something is going to get damaged. This is a toy. This right here is an investment. Alright, it's a good idea that if you're completely new to drones or unmanned aircraft and controllers that look like this, then maybe it's a good idea to learn to fly a drone on something that's a little more economical, less expensive, something that you're willing to crash. Alright, you purchased a new drone, something like this, or maybe someone gave you a brand new drone of this level. Are you going to let somebody else fly it? I hope not. They're expensive. Alright, you're new to drones or unmanned aircraft, and you want to take some precautions. One of them that you might want to consider are prop guards, ones that protect not only the drone itself, but anything that it might bump into. Super important. And if you do consider these, make sure that you get the ones that snap together, not the ones that screw into the drone or unmanned aircraft. Not a very good design if you ask me. Also, make sure if you do get these, that they don't adversely affect the flight of the drone or unmanned aircraft. Another precaution that you might want to take is getting gimbal guards. They are devices that stretch from here to there or some other mechanism that actually protects the gimbal and the camera. It's a good idea. Alright, you got your first drone and you also got the first person view goggles. Well, I gotta tell you, practice flying the drone without the goggles first. Make sure that you know how to fly this and understand how it operates within the environment that you're going to be in before you put those goggles on. The goggles are limiting in terms of your ability to understand situational awareness. If you do fly first person view, make sure you have a spotter and that you have direct communication with that spotter. Alright, the last helpful tip, and this is an important one for colorblind people like me. On this drone right here, I know that these are different colors, but I can't see the difference in these colors. I can only see this one right here. So to help with that, what I do is I put a plus sign or a minus sign on one side and something that's different on the other. This helps me with orientation, finding out which direction the aircraft is heading. It's helpful. Great, we're starting a whole new section. The previous section was all about doing things prior to taking off. In this section, this is about taking off and we're in flight. The very first thing that we want to talk about is the law. We need to make sure that you do not fly your drone next to emergency personnel or emergency activities. It's against the law. You will get in trouble. There may be civil penalties and fines. Don't do it. A big newbie fail is not practicing see and avoid and yielding right-of-way to other aircraft. You may not pass over, under, or ahead of another aircraft unless it's well clear. It's the law. One of the most dangerous fails any drone or unmanned aircraft pilot may make is losing visual line of sight of their aircraft. If this happens, the level of risk just increased rapidly. Make sure this doesn't happen to you. If you have a reason to fly beyond visual line of sight, you need to contact the FAA and fill out a certificate of waiver. Flying in unsafe areas is a huge fail. Examples of this would be flying over people, obviously. Others would be flying in wired environment. This includes things like power lines or guy wires or any type of cable that helps support a structure. This includes cables that extend from the ground up to a moored balloon. Avoid those. Flying over traffic or moving vehicles is not only a huge fail, it's against the law. Don't do it. Do not fly your drone or unmanned aircraft higher than 400 feet above ground level. Also, do not attempt to fly more than one drone at the same time. This includes flying one drone up to a certain altitude, setting it in hover mode, and then operating the other drone around it or anywhere near it, or operating the second drone at all. Just don't do it. It's against the law. You already know that you're supposed to maintain visual line of sight, and this includes making sure that you do not fly behind buildings where you're going to lose visual line of sight. The radio frequencies from your control station to your drone are considered line of sight at long distances. Yes, these guys will communicate with your drone through a building that is not concrete and not metal in short distances. But in long distances, behind a building, behind an obstruction, you will lose command and control links, and this may initiate return to home sequence. Do not fail to keep an eye on the battery temperature of your drone or unmanned aircraft. These guys can get very hot, and if these reach temperatures that exceed the manufacturer's recommended level, it may go into thermal runaway and catch on fire. So keep an eye on these. Very important. If you've completely failed and not returned your drone or unmanned aircraft after you've reached a battery alert that you previously set, and now it's at the critical battery alert, then the drone will start to descend and attempt to land at where it's at. You will have control over yaw and pitch, but not descent. Straight down. A common newbie fail is failing to understand the difference between gaining altitude with your drone or unmanned aircraft and descending. A drone or unmanned aircraft can gain altitude very, very quickly, whereas descending is typically controlled and slower, much slower. So if you have battery concerns, take that into consideration. There are many drones on the market, from very economical to something that's a little more powerful and featureful. In fact, there are drones, I'm sure you might have guessed, that are more powerful than these. Now, for drones that are a little more economical, you need to be paying attention to its technical limitations. In other words, don't fly beyond its technical capabilities. If you do, you might lose the video feed. And if this happens and you lose GPS during that time, you can pretty much kiss your drone goodbye. Poof. Another example of trying to understand the technical limitations of your drone or unmanned aircraft is knowing how to operate it and its technical limitations with respect to the wind. If, let's say for example, I were to ask you to run downhill for 10 minutes, then expect you to run back that same distance and make it back in 3 minutes, then I think you have a good idea of the impact of wind. So if you're flying with the wind, right, very low impact on the batteries. If you're flying back and you're low on battery, this is going to be a problem. I think you get this. Failing to appreciate and understand the impacts of wind on your drone or unmanned aircraft is a huge fail. You need to understand that when you're around bodies of water, the ocean, a huge lake, the change in the atmospheric pressure causes the wind to circulate, and you need to understand that it's different at night and during the day. Also, if you gain altitude with your drone or unmanned aircraft, you can expect stronger winds. Also, next to cliffs or other types of earth type of obstructions or buildings, expect the wind to change dramatically as you come over an edge or around a corner. Yep, that will cause a problem if you're not paying attention. One more item about wind, and this is an important one, particularly if you lose GPS signal. Your drone or unmanned aircraft is going to go in what's called ATTI mode. That means that the altitude will remain the same, but the position will not be locked. It will be subjected to the wind. So if you're in a windy environment and you lose GPS, whoa! Learn how to control it in ATTI mode. Okay, I lied. I've got 2 more items to talk about relative to the wind. So let's talk about this one. Let's say that you're gaining altitude with your drone or unmanned aircraft. And this is the treetops right here. As you're approaching, you can expect that things might be kind of calm. But as soon as you get above the treetops, you can expect that the wind is going to impact your drone immensely. Yes, I have actually heard of many people who've lost their drone. On their first day, they went to see, hey, let's make this thing climb, and then poof, it went past the treetops and down somewhere and they never saw it again. If your drone has the ability to measure its attitude, that is to say, the aircraft's position relative to the Earth's surface, then you might be able to understand the impact of the wind on the aircraft. So, for example, if the aircraft is level like this, we can say that it's relatively low wind. And if the wind is coming in from this direction and the aircraft is trying to maintain its position, it will go like this in order to stay put, right? It's starting to pitch. And this demonstrates the aircraft's attitude relative to the Earth's surface. The more it pitches to maintain its position, the stronger the wind. Another huge newbie fail is playing around with sports mode and not understanding what's really going on or its impact. Sports mode means that it's going really fast, obviously, right? So it's super pitched like this, the sensors are turned off, and it's going really fast. When you hit stop, it's not going to stop on a dime. It's going to have some inertial drift. So if you're near any trees or a building or people in sports mode and you're trying to stop, you can bank on there being problems. A big fail for newbies and experienced pilots is flying too close to the water surface. This has barometric and ultrasonic sensors which, when close to the water, may not operate as expected. Spoiler alert, splash. You need to understand the limitations of your object avoidance and sensors of your unmanned aircraft and drone. They may not operate as well as you might expect in low light conditions. These sensors are not built the same on every model of drone or unmanned aircraft. Small branches and wires or fishing line things like that, it's not going to detect, particularly in low light situations. One of the really nice features that comes with most drones is called headless mode. DJI calls it Intelligent Orientation Control, and it's best explained with an example. Let's say, for example, I have a drone and it's 200 yards out and it's facing in this direction. That's forward, that is back. If I'm not in headless mode and I push forward on the stick, we have this action. If I pull back on the stick, we see this. Then if I switch over to headless mode, then I push forward on the stick, it goes like that, and if I pull back on the stick, it comes back to me. So all the commands that I issue in headless mode are relative to my controller. Make sense? Great. Drones come with a lot of fun features, like auto tracking and orbit. And new drone pilots, they want to take their drones out and experiment with these autopilot features. They're pretty fun. Spoiler alert, crash. They're not preparing for what the drone doesn't see as it's rotating around or tracking that particular person. It won't see or react to small branches or wires or things like that. So be careful. Plan where you're going to do these autopilot features. It's not uncommon for a new drone pilot or a new unmanned aircraft pilot to panic now and then. But do your best to maintain situational awareness. Have a cool head. Remain calm. If you can, just breathe deep and you'll be okay. Try and avoid any type of hyperventilation. I think you'll be alright. As a new drone or unmanned aircraft pilot, you need to make sure you do not fail at maintaining your attention on three things. Number one, maintain your attention on the drone or unmanned aircraft. That's most of your attention right there. Number two, your attention on the dashboard of your controller. It's giving you information that's very helpful. And three, maintaining situational awareness. Practice see and avoid and yield right away if necessary. Here's a really common newbie fail. New drone or unmanned aircraft pilots tend to focus most of their time on the dashboard of their controller versus keeping an eye on their drone or unmanned aircraft that's in the sky and maintaining situational awareness. If you can, start to move away from the controller to the drone and maintaining more situational awareness. It's a fail if you focus mostly on the dashboard. Another fail for newbies and experienced pilots is cocky behavior or showing off. This is dangerous and risky. Don't do it. Here's my number one pro tip, and this is really important. Do not take off, fly, or land around children. Keep them safe. If you do this, it makes you look really bad and it demonstrates poor judgment. Also, don't do the same around animals, particularly dogs. Dogs will try to grab the drone with their mouth, or they might try to attack it. These are pretty strange things to a dog, so be careful out there. Alright, my next pro tip has to do with children and animals again. If you're in a situation where you started your piloting and there were no children or animals where you started, but then suddenly they came in and you don't have the option to move out of the area, okay? So when you bring the drone in, consider putting it into hover mode and doing an air catch. My next pro tip is for newbies who are setting up and getting ready to launch for the very first time. Most premium drones will have some type of launch distance between the controller and the launch. A lot of times it'll be anywhere from 15 to 25 feet from the control station to the actual drone or unmanned aircraft, okay? But not all drone makers do this, so make sure that you're standing a sufficient distance away from the drone on your first launch. Really important. Alright, my next pro tip. Drones, well, yeah, obviously they're a whole lot of fun, and the cameras that come with them and the video and the pictures that you can take with these are even more fun in my opinion. So my advice to you is to master learning how to fly this first before you start to fiddle with the controls for the gimbal and the camera. Super important. So here's what you can do. While you're mastering to learn flying the drone, take the props off while you're at home, and then just set this somewhere and start fiddling with the camera controls, the gimbal controls, and learn how to master that. Learn where everything's at and feel comfortable with it so that it becomes second nature by the time you get out in the field and you've learned how to fly it, and now you've already learned a little bit about mastering the controls of the gimbal and the camera. Make good sense? This next pro tip is all about smooth movements navigating your drone, and this is achieved with the pinch method. Some people use the thumb method. This, I believe, has more steady control, smoother. This next pro tip is understanding when GPS may be an issue. Okay, so we already know that we need GPS to maintain a solid, steady position to get that premium shot, right? Okay, so if we lose GPS signal, it goes into ATTI mode, which we already know means that it's going to maintain altitude, but its position may be subjected to the wind, so it'll drift a little bit, and that could be a problem. It could be a safety issue. Now, if you're flying in a dense forest with lots of coverage and tree branches, you may lose your GPS signal. If you're flying through a slot canyon, you may lose your GPS signal. If you're descending down a waterfall, there's a good chance you're going to lose your GPS signal for a little bit. And this also happens to people who film rock climbers with drones. This can be a problem because you're on one side of a big wall and suddenly you've lost a few GPS satellites. So keep in mind these situations where it may go into ATTI mode, and if that happens and there's wind, it could just push your drone right into an obstacle or a rock wall. This next pro tip is all about your takeoff, especially for newbies, right? Okay, so you're about to take off and you're cautious and you want to go slow and you're pushing up on the stick and you're trying to get it to rise, and you see it just coming off a little bit. Sometimes what happens is all this bubble of air of what it's pushing down on will cause the drone to flip like that. So go ahead, give it a little bit of a thrust. Okay, it shoots up. Sometimes it'll shoot up to 20 feet, sometimes to 10. Okay, make sure that there's nothing above you when you're doing this, especially if you're doing it indoors, okay? So be careful out there. There's also auto start features, or auto launch, I should say that, where it'll automatically shoot up to about 5 feet. So there are those features. There's a different perspective out there on the approaches with those auto features, but definitely learn how to take off on your own, okay? Good. All right, good luck out there. This next pro tip seems rather obvious, but it seems to be overlooked or ignored by a lot of people who fly drones and unmanned aircraft, and that is a controlled descent or landing. Okay, so we definitely want this guy or any drone for that matter to come down like this, nice and smooth. You want to protect your investment. This is your money. Unless you bought some really economical drone. Well, hey, you can do anything you want with that, right? So a not so good landing is one that comes in at a low angle and it's going really fast. It's going to crash as soon as it hits the ground. It's going to catch the edge, boom, whoosh, just like that. Don't do it. My last pro tip for now is understanding that you should not take risks when flying over something or under something too closely. This is really important. You may want to get that great shot, but it's not worth damaging the property that you run into or damaging your drone, okay? So this is pretty easy. When you're flying your drone over something, you should be able to see the surface, the top surface of what you're flying over clearly. The same thing if you're flying underneath. You should be able to see the surface underneath clearly as you go underneath it. Don't risk it. If it even looks close to where you can't see the surface above or below, depending on how you're flying, don't do it. All right, you're done with your flight. You got some good shots, you got some good video. Now what do? Well, particularly if you're a good pilot, you're going to document, okay? You're going to document the flight time. And if you have a premium drone, some of that is going to be recorded. With DJI, this records the battery usage and battery flight time, okay? So that's done for you. But you need to also pay attention to the time and service for all the parts. That's super helpful, okay? Now, some other things to keep in mind is that not all drone makers have something that records battery flight time. So you're gonna have to do this manually. But definitely keep an eye on the amount of time that your drone or unmanned aircraft has spent in the sky, particularly with the batteries. All right, your drone or unmanned aircraft flight has ended, but it didn't end well. It ended with an accident. And if it hits someone or some property, these are things that we need to understand and talk about, okay? So if it hits someone and that person was knocked unconscious or sent to the hospital, you need to send a report of that accident to the FAA within 10 days. Now, if the drone or unmanned aircraft hit some property and caused damage other than itself, and that damage exceeded $500, and what I mean by that, repair or replace, okay? So if both of those, repair or replace, exceeds $500, you need to send a report to the FAA in 10 days. If repair or replace, either one of those, is less than $500, you do not need to send out a report. Got it? Great, let's get started with my most favorite part, and that is capturing good video with your drones or unmanned aircraft. I really like this part. This is super fun. And let's say, for example, you're flying through a canyon or you're getting that great shot. You spent some time doing it just at the perfect time of day, and you realize when you get back that you failed to hit record. My suggestion to you is, 1, don't forget to hit record, and 2, record the entire flight. Don't be stingy. It's okay. This next tip seems rather obvious, but people forget to do this all the time. You've captured that perfect moneymaker shot or that perfect memory of a wedding, whatever it happens to be. You don't want to lose that. As soon as you bring that bird home, make sure that you pull out the SD card and back it up to whatever device it will back it up, okay? Then start your next flight. Make this a regular practice because there is a chance you may lose your data to a crash or for whatever reason. It can happen. This next tip seems rather obvious. So there's 2 broad categories when you are taking videos, okay? 1, you're doing it for yourself. And in that case, you can film and choose whatever subject you want. You're the audience, okay? So if you're doing it for somebody else, then that changes things a little bit. You need to understand your audience. What is it that they need? And in doing so, you're going to choose the right subject, the right perspective, the right approach, the right mood. You need to deliver the product, the video quality, and its type and feeling that is appropriate and needed by the person who's hiring you to do this. So, pretty basic pro tip. All right, you've got your new drone or unmanned aircraft and you're ready to start shooting some video. And you want it to be quality video. So you should know about certain times of day or maybe certain types of light that improve the quality of your video. An obvious one is going to be choosing the blue hour and the golden hour. So the blue hour is the time just before sunrise and also the time just after sunset. The golden hour is just after sunrise and the time just before sunset. So these are really good times to take good video. Get out there, give it a try. Most videographers will tell you, keep your shots, your video short, okay? particularly if you're going to stitch a bunch of video together to create a scene. But if your intent is to maybe sell your videos to stock photography websites and places like that, then yeah, get that minute-long video, get that 30-second video. But for the most part, short shots are better. The best advice that I can give you is keep your shots simple. Just about any videographer will tell you that keep the shots short, keep them simple. And the more complex a shot gets, the more difficult it is to achieve. So you're spending more and more time trying to achieve that particular shot, particularly if it gets more complex. So let's say, for example, you're trying to rotate around a subject. Not so bad. But if you're trying to rotate around a subject and descend or gain altitude at the same time, that's a little more tricky. If you're trying to do all that and manipulate some of the gimbal or camera controls, now you've not only added a layer of complexity, you've added a layer of risk. So choose your shots carefully, plan them out. That's the best advice I can give you. Alright, now you've learned how to get the good shot from your drone or unmanned aircraft. You've picked out a good subject and you've captured that great video. Now you want to do something a little more complex, like create a scene. And if you're going to create a scene with your drone or unmanned aircraft, make sure that you plan out your sequence of shots well in advance. Plan it out, because just randomly stitching together some video is going to look very unprofessional. So make sure that you visualize where the drone is going to be, the altitude of the drone, the position of the drone. You can do all sorts of post edits later, but for the most part, make sure that you do a walkthrough of where the shots are going to be so that you can stitch it together. Alright, next up are the automatic camera settings for your drone. This is really important if you're trying to achieve really good video. If you're just an amateur videographer flying around grabbing some great shots, the automatic camera settings are good. However, if you want to achieve something a little more professional, you're going to adjust the settings of the camera to the needs of your scene. Alright, an example of a camera setting that you want to adjust is the frames per second and the shutter speed. So an example of this is going to be, let's say, 30 frames per second. You want the shutter speed to be 1/60. The next basic tip is about exposure and setting the exposure settings. So in this case, we don't want to overexpose a shot. And if you do, it looks too white or too bright or washed out. And you don't want to do the opposite, and that's underexpose it, where it's going to look dark or not enough light. And we can adjust these settings with the camera. You can also fix this a little bit, but not entirely, in post-production. One of my favorite features about the Typhoon is the ability to pan in 360. This allows you to fly in any direction that you want, and it will automatically pan for you at a speed that you want. Watch this. Here's a slow pan. Here's a fast one. And it will do this 360 degrees, and the landing gear lifts up and gets out of the way. It's a very nice feature. Alright, the basic tip here is to make sure that your video looks as smooth as possible. We want to prevent jerky movements. If you're doing something like this, right, and you're trying to capture movements, and then suddenly you do this, okay, that's going to show up and it's going to look really unprofessional. With a drone like this, we have some panning features that you can manipulate the controls, the navigation of the drone, and have auto panning. Really nice, super cool. This drone does have some image control where it'll track an image, and it looks nice, smooth, and professional. But some of the other drones out there don't have this. and you need to be very good at navigating and controlling the camera and the movements. So it's a give and take, practice, but try and not have jerky movements. Be as smooth as possible. Alright, another big fail when shooting in sports mode. And remember that when you're flying in sports mode, the sensors are turned off. So anyhow, you're flying in sports mode and you're getting that great shot and you realize, whoa, okay, the props are in the way of the camera. So how do you get around that? Okay, so one of the ways that you can do that is fly normal speed like this, and in post-production speed up the video. Or you can fly backwards, which is pretty common. But sometimes you're just tracking something that's going fast, right? So make sure that if you are tracking something in sports mode, that you make sure that the subject, whatever you're tracking, is down lower and not out here, okay? So that's for this type of drone. Now, if you're using this type of drone, we realize that this is less of a problem. In terms of a drone for shooting video, I think this is a more superior product. We have more options with this type of drone, particularly with the landing gear that lifts up. So anyhow, the faster you go, you can track with this, the better. You have more options. Okay, the last tip that I can give you today is less about video and more about understanding the capabilities and limitations of your drone. So it is not uncommon to get the good shot by getting the video and moving your drone backwards. One, it takes a little bit of skill, but it also requires a little bit of situational awareness. Don't completely rely on the sensors to prevent you from hitting an object, because the sensors don't pick up wires and tree branches very well. Okay, so keep that in mind.